She hadn't even placed her napkin on her lap before the words struck like a whip across the dining hall. "Get her out of here. People like her don't belong where we eat." The voice was sharp, dripping with disdain, carrying across the polished marble walls of the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan. Heads snapped toward the source. A woman in diamonds, Elaine Carter, wife of billionaire Richard Carter, sat glaring at a quiet stranger in the corner booth. It wasn't whispered, it wasn't subtle, it was loud, public, and meant to humiliate. The room froze. Forks stopped mid-air, conversations collapsed into silence, and even the soft piano in the background seemed to stumble. All attention shifted to one woman, Ava Morgan. She wore no designer jewelry, no tailored dress, nothing that screamed wealth or power. Her attire was simple, plain, so plain that to the Carters it was an insult in itself. To them, she wasn't just underdressed, she was undeserving. Elaine's voice cut again. "This is a place for people who've earned it, not her." Gasps rippled across the room. A few guests hid their smirks behind champagne glasses. Others looked down, unwilling to meet Ava's eyes. The staff froze, caught between the orders of the Carters and the quiet dignity of the woman they were told to remove. But Ava didn't move. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even blink. What no one in that room knew, what not one of them could have guessed, was that the woman they were trying to throw out was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, a woman whose name carried power in circles far beyond the Carters' reach. Yet here she sat, invisible to them, treated like nothing. And in that silence, where dignity met humiliation, another storm was already rising. If you are watching this and you feel that silence in the face of injustice is dangerous, then subscribe right now and state where you are watching from, because if you don't, your silence only feeds the same system of oppression she faced. And for those who refuse to subscribe, go to the comments, confess why, and face the discomfort of admitting why you chose not to stand with truth. The manager hesitated at the edge of the dining hall, wringing his hands, his eyes darting between Elaine Carter's raised chin and the quiet woman seated in the corner. He knew the Carters by reputation, known for their wealth, feared for their influence. When they demanded something, people usually obeyed. But the woman they wanted removed. There was something about her, something unspoken. She sat perfectly still, her posture calm, her breathing even, as if she had already endured scenes like this before. The eyes of the restaurant drilled into her, yet she remained composed, a calm in the storm of humiliation. Her name was Ava Morgan. To the average person on the street, the name meant little. To a few on Wall Street, it meant everything. Ava was the kind of figure whispered about in boardrooms and feared in conference calls. A billionaire whose companies touched everything from Silicon Valley to international trade, yet she had mastered the art of disappearing. No social media presence, no interviews, no red carpet appearances. Some even doubted she was real. That's why no one recognized her now. Here she was, worth billions, powerful enough to shake economies, and yet dressed in a simple blouse and modest skirt, blending into the room like she didn't belong. And because she didn't look the part, they decided she didn't deserve the part. Richard Carter rose from his seat. His tall frame cast a shadow across the table as he adjusted his cufflinks, each step toward Ava's table echoing like a warning. Elaine smirked in satisfaction, her eyes never leaving the woman she had decided to shame. The whispers grew louder. Who is she? Why is she even here? She looks lost. No one dared intervene, not a single guest, not a single waiter. Silence spread like a disease, and in that silence, humiliation felt safe for everyone except the woman in the corner. But Ava's eyes, calm, sharp, unreadable, betrayed something more. She wasn't just a stranger in the wrong place. She was someone used to masks, someone used to letting people underestimate her, someone who carried secrets too heavy for the room to even imagine. And at that moment, as Richard Carter's shoes clicked closer, Ava's hand brushed lightly across the table. Her fingers tapped once, twice, against a folded piece of paper resting beside her glass of water. No one noticed it. No one even cared. But later, that slip of paper would change everything. For now, the humiliation continued. Elaine leaned back in her chair and sneered. Are we really going to let just anyone sit among us now? If she stays, then what's the point of exclusivity? Places like this are meant for those who matter. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few nodded, others looked away. But still, nobody spoke. And in that silence, Ava Morgan, Billionaire CEO, sat alone, carrying a truth that could shatter the entire room if only she chose to speak. But she didn't. Not yet. Because the moment of revelation was coming, and when it did, no one in that restaurant would ever forget it. Ask yourself, if you were sitting in that dining hall, would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked away like everyone else? In the far corner of the restaurant, behind a tray stacked with polished glasses, Naomi Brooks had seen everything. She was 24, young, ambitious, and exhausted. This was her second double shift of the week, and she carried it in the way her shoulders sagged between tables. Most of the customers never noticed her, just another waitress weaving through their world of privilege, a shadow who refilled their wine glasses and vanished before her presence became inconvenient. But tonight, Naomi noticed something no one else had. The woman in the corner, Ava Morgan, sat as though she wasn't merely enduring humiliation, but measuring it. Naomi could read it in the stillness of her expression, in the deliberate calm that seemed more like control than fear. And Naomi knew that control. Her mother had taught it to her years ago in Chicago. When they expect you to break, that's when you hold yourself higher. Dignity is the armor they cannot strip away. But Naomi wasn't just carrying dignity, she was carrying a secret, one she had never spoken aloud to her co-workers, one that seemed laughably out of place in a restaurant like this. She could read the slip of paper on Ava's table. The handwriting wasn't English, the curved strokes, the precise characters, it was Japanese. And Naomi recognized it instantly. Most of the staff saw nothing but foreign ink, but Naomi's late mother had worked for a Japanese family in Chicago, and on her deathbed she left Naomi a tattered phrasebook and a promise. Learn their words, Naomi. Someday they might protect you. For years Naomi studied in silence, at night after school, between shifts, on buses with the phrasebook open across her knees. No one ever asked why a waitress from Chicago carried such an unusual skill, and Naomi never explained, until now. As Richard Carter loomed closer, as Elaine's voice cut sharper with each insult, Naomi's pulse quickened. She should have kept her head down. She should have looked away like everyone else. Waitresses weren't supposed to interfere with Billionaire's arguments. But her mother's voice echoed again. Dignity is defended, not given. Naomi took a step forward. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as she cleared her throat. Glasses clinked softly on her tray, but her voice cut across the room, strong and clear. In perfect Japanese. Every head turned, eyes wide, stunned not only by the words, but by who had spoken them. A black waitress, in a starched white apron, addressing a billionaire's wife in a language no one expected her to know. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. And in that silence, Ava Morgan finally looked up. For the first time all evening, her lips curved, not into a smile, but into recognition. The bond was unspoken, the meaning yet unknown. But in that moment, two women, worlds apart in wealth, in power, in circumstance, shared a secret no one else in the room could understand. And the storm inside that restaurant had only just begun. If you believe hidden talents can shatter prejudice, drop your country in the comments right now. Show the world how you'd stand with Naomi in this moment, when silence was the easy choice, but courage was the harder path. For a heartbeat, no one in the restaurant moved. The words Naomi had spoken in flawless Japanese seemed to hang in the air, fragile and disbelieved, as though the walls themselves weren't sure they had heard them correctly. A black waitress, apron still dusted with flour, had just cracked open a language few in the room even recognized, and she had spoken it with precision. Elaine Carter blinked, her painted lips parting in a mixture of surprise and disgust. She forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "Oh, how cute," she sneered. "The help thinks she's worldly." A ripple of low chuckles spread from one table, but it was uneasy, nervous, because across the room Ava Morgan had finally moved. Her eyes, calm and unreadable all night, lifted toward Naomi. And when she spoke, her voice was low, steady, and, just like Naomi's, entirely in Japanese. The sound of it sliced through the uneasy laughter. Guests stared, wide-eyed, as two women, one billionaire, one waitress, conversed in a language most of them couldn't follow. Naomi's breath caught. She hadn't expected a reply, not from this stranger, and certainly not in a voice that carried such weight, such confidence, as though Ava had been waiting for this moment. Their exchange was brief, a handful of words, but it was enough to shift the air in the room. Ava leaned back in her chair, hands folded, her gaze locked on Naomi. For the first time that evening, she looked less like a woman enduring humiliation and more like someone allowing a secret to surface, someone who had chosen her moment. Richard Carter's heavy steps stopped mid-stride. Confusion flashed in his eyes, but pride swallowed it quickly. He glanced at Elaine, whose smirk had faltered. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and in that flush, her anger deepened. "Enough of this circus," Elaine snapped. "She's a waitress, and the other one, whoever she is, has no right to sit here. Throw them both out if you must. This is our space." The manager shifted uncomfortably, sweat forming at his temples. He looked at Naomi, then at Ava, then back at the Carters, trapped in the impossible balance between money and morality. But the room was no longer on the Carters' side. The silence that followed wasn't one of agreement. It was heavy, strained, and fractured by the truth that something extraordinary had just happened, a truth that could no longer be ignored. And in the corner of that high-priced dining hall, two women sat bound together by a language that no one else could understand. If you believe courage can echo louder than wealth, then subscribe right now and write your country in the comments. Show that even across oceans and borders, you would have stood in that silence, not with the ones who mocked, but with the ones who stood tall. Richard Carter's polished shoes scraped against the marble floor as he resumed his walk toward Ava's table. His height, his tailored suit, his very presence commanded the space like a predator surveying prey. He stopped just short of the table, his shadow falling across Ava and Naomi. The chatter that had begun to stir around the room fell silent again. All that remained was the faint clink of a spoon somewhere in the back, forgotten mid-stir. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tightening. "This establishment has standards," he said, his voice low but carrying, as though the entire dining hall were his courtroom. "It is not a place for—" He paused, his eyes raking over Ava's plain attire, then flicking with disdain toward Naomi's uniform. "People who don't belong." Naomi's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of every eye pressing into her, waiting to see if she would shrink back. But Ava didn't move. Instead, she slowly lifted her glass of water, took a deliberate sip, and placed it back down with a calm precision that made Richard's words feel smaller. That stillness enraged him. Elaine leaned forward, her voice sharper now, the mask of charm gone. "We pay to keep this place exclusive. If anyone can just walk in, sit down, and be served, then what's the point?" The manager finally stepped forward, wringing his hands. His voice wavered. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, please, if we could keep things dignified." Elaine's eyes flashed. "Dignified? You call this dignified? Having her sit here while we dine? This is an insult. If you value our patronage, you'll remove her immediately." The manager froze, torn between the Carters' threats and the sight of Ava, unshaken, unbothered, her gaze never leaving Richard's. And then, like a slow wave, the whispers began again. She really doesn't belong here. Why isn't management doing anything? The Carters are right. Look at her. The tide of opinion shifted, not because people believed Elaine, but because people feared disagreeing with her. Fear of wealth, fear of power, fear of standing alone. Naomi felt the air tightening, suffocating. Every instinct told her to step back, to let the storm pass. But her mother's words rang in her ears again, louder now. Dignity is defended, not given. She stood her ground. Ava's fingers brushed once more across the folded paper beside her water glass. No one else noticed. But Naomi did. Something about that paper, its careful placement, the way Ava touched it as if it were both weapon and shield, told Naomi the humiliation wasn't going to end the way the Carters expected. For the first time, Richard faltered, just for a breath. He saw the composure in Ava's eyes, the refusal to shrink. But pride swallowed his hesitation. He leaned down slightly, his voice a low growl meant only for her. You will regret sitting at this table. But Ava's silence answered louder than words. And somewhere, beneath the surface of the restaurant's polished calm, the battle lines had already been drawn. Ask yourself, when wealth and arrogance confront dignity and silence, whose side would you stand on? If you know your answer, subscribe now and declare your country in the comments. Because history has always remembered those who chose to speak, and those who looked away. Naomi's fingers tightened around the tray she was holding. Her chest rose and fell with quick, uneven breaths. For years she had served quietly, invisibly, slipping through rooms like this one, unnoticed except when her hands delivered a bottle of wine or cleared a half-eaten plate. But tonight, invisibility wasn't an option. She stepped forward, placing herself between Ava's table and the looming figure of Richard Carter. Gasps rippled across the room. No waitress was supposed to interfere, let alone challenge a man like Richard Carter. Richard's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into something between anger and disbelief. Move aside, he ordered, his voice deep, heavy with authority. This doesn't concern you. But Naomi's feet held firm. Her mind raced back to the nights she watched her mother scrub hotel floors, ignored, degraded, treated as though her labor was the only part of her that mattered. She remembered the times she herself had been dismissed by customers who couldn't be bothered to look her in the eye. She remembered the sting of being invisible. Not tonight. With respect, sir, she said, her voice steady but loud enough to carry across the dining hall. It concerns me when someone is treated as less than human. The room went still. Elaine Carter's laugh broke the silence, sharp and cruel. Listen to her, she said, turning to the tables around her. A waitress, lecturing us on humanity. Tell me, do they train you to preach between serving plates, or is this extra? A ripple of laughter followed, but it was thinner now, strained, some of it forced. Naomi felt her stomach twist, but she didn't move. She kept her body planted firmly in front of Ava, as if her presence alone could shield her. Ava's eyes lifted slowly to Naomi, and for the first time that night, something flickered there, something softer than steel. Recognition, gratitude, perhaps even trust. And then Ava did something no one expected. She reached for the folded envelope on the table. It was plain, cream-colored, unmarked. She placed it carefully on the linen, sliding it an inch closer to Naomi without a word. Naomi's breath caught. She glanced down at it, then back at Ava. Why give it to her? What was inside? But Ava's gaze didn't waver. It was deliberate, intentional, as if saying without words, "This is yours to protect." The manager rushed forward, panic in his eyes. "Naomi, stop this. Please, think of your job. If you interfere again, I'll have no choice but to let you go." Her job, her rent, her tuition, everything she'd been clawing to hold together could vanish in an instant if she defied the Carters any further. She felt the weight of it crushing her chest. But then she looked at Ava, sitting with quiet defiance, a billionaire disguised as a nobody, enduring humiliation most people could never imagine. And Naomi knew. She stepped closer, placed the tray firmly on the nearest table, and squared her shoulders. "If you fire me for defending what's right," Naomi said, her voice trembling but strong, "then maybe this isn't the kind of place I want to work." A hush fell over the room, and for the first time, the Carters looked unsettled. Because this was no longer humiliation in silence. This was resistance. And it had just begun. Would you risk your job, your livelihood, your future to stand up for someone being humiliated? Or would you stay quiet to protect yourself? The envelope lay on the table, no larger than a dinner check, but somehow heavier than anything Naomi had ever seen. Her fingers brushed its edge, hesitating. Every eye in the restaurant was on her now, the staff, the guests, even the Carters. To open it in front of them would be crossing a line she could never step back over, but to leave it untouched felt just as dangerous. Elaine leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Passing notes like children now?" Naomi said nothing. Ava's gaze didn't move from her, steady and unyielding. It wasn't a command, but an invitation. "Look, see for yourself." Naomi's hands trembled as she slid her thumb under the flap. The paper opened with the softest tear, but in the silence of the room it sounded like thunder. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, neatly folded, and then her breath caught. Across the page was a contract, one stamped with the seal of the Carter Corporation. It was signed, dated, and beneath the neat lines of legal jargon lay something explosive, a wire transfer, millions of dollars, to an offshore account, and beneath that, another signature, Richard Carter's. Gasps echoed around the room as Naomi's hands shook, holding proof of something no one dared imagine. She didn't understand every detail, but one thing was clear. This was no dinner receipt. This was evidence, evidence of something vast, something dangerous, something that could shatter the Carter empire if it ever left that envelope. Richard's face went pale. His confident smirk evaporated in an instant. He lunged forward, his hand shooting toward the paper. "Give me that," he barked, his voice cracking with panic. But Naomi stepped back. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. But Ava's calm presence anchored her. For the first time, Naomi realized the truth. Ava hadn't come to this restaurant by accident. She hadn't been here for dinner. She had been here for this, to expose them. The room erupted in whispers. "Is that real? Did you see the numbers? That's Carter's signature." Elaine slammed her hand on the table. "Enough! She's lying. She planted it. You all saw." But no one looked convinced. Naomi held the paper to her chest, her heart pounding so loudly she thought the entire restaurant could hear it. And Ava? Ava simply leaned back in her chair, her eyes locked on Richard, as if daring him to take another step. For the first time that night, the billionaire couple wasn't in control. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the restaurant knew it. What would you have done if you held that envelope? Would you have opened it, knowing the risk, or stayed silent, letting corruption stay hidden? The whispers in the restaurant grew louder, swirling like a tide that neither Richard nor Elaine Carter could control. For the first time in years, their power didn't silence a room, it fractured it. Eyes that once looked at them with envy now stared with suspicion. Richard's chest heaved as he pointed at Naomi, his finger trembling not with weakness, but with fury. "You have no idea what you're holding," he hissed. "Hand it over now, or you'll regret it." Naomi's pulse raced. Her fingers clutched the paper tighter against her chest. She wanted to crumble, to disappear, but Ava's voice cut through the tension like steel wrapped in velvet. Still calm, still deliberate, still in Japanese. Everyone stared, confused, unable to follow her words. But Naomi understood every syllable. Ava wasn't just speaking, she was instructing. "Do not give it back. Whatever happens, keep it safe. The weight of that responsibility pressed into Naomi's bones. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was holding the kind of secret that could dismantle a dynasty. Elaine rose from her chair, her jewels clinking against her silk dress. Her eyes blazed. "You think anyone here will believe a waitress over us?" she spat. "We could ruin you with a single phone call. You'll never work in this city again. You'll be lucky to scrub dishes for rent money when we're through." The threat landed heavy. Naomi's chest tightened. Images flashed in her mind, late rent notices, her mother's voice urging her to push forward, the exhaustion of working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. She could lose everything, and yet Ava's calm gaze anchored her once more. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough to chill the air. "That envelope doesn't leave this room. Hand it over, or I'll make sure you regret ever stepping between us." The manager rushed forward, his face pale, his voice desperate. "Please, Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, let's not escalate further. There are guests, there are witnesses." But Elaine snapped, her voice cutting like glass. "Witnesses who know better than to cross us. Isn't that right?" She scanned the tables, daring anyone to disagree. Heads dropped, eyes turned away. Silence. No one spoke. Naomi felt her stomach twist. The crowd wasn't with her. They were with themselves. Their silence was their shield. And yet, somewhere deep inside her, courage flared again. Her mother's voice echoed fierce and unyielding. "Dignity is defended, not given." Naomi lifted her chin, clutching the envelope tighter. "Maybe I am just a waitress," she said, her voice trembling but rising over the silence. "But at least I'm not afraid to tell the truth." A murmur swept through the room. People shifted in their chairs, uncertain now, caught between fear of the Carters and the undeniable courage of a woman with nothing but the truth in her hands. Richard's fist clenched. His face reddened. Elaine's lips curled into a venomous smile. "You've made a mistake," she said, "and you'll pay for it." But Ava finally leaned forward, her fingers steepled together, her eyes locking with Richard's. And when she spoke, it wasn't in Japanese this time. It was in perfect, deliberate English. "No, Richard, the mistake was yours." The room froze, because in those 5 words, for the first time, everyone in the restaurant realized Ava Morgan wasn't just a stranger. She was someone far, far more dangerous. Would you have Naomi's courage to hold the truth when the powerful threaten you? Or would fear silence you, like it silenced everyone else in that room? The room was suffocatingly still. Ava's words, 5 simple words in flawless English, hung in the air like a bell no one knew how to answer. "The mistake was yours." Richard froze mid-step. Elaine's smug expression faltered. The guests shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between Ava and the Carters, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The silence stretched, too long, too heavy, until finally Richard broke it with a scoff. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" he sneered, trying to claw back his dominance. "Another activist? A fraud? A nobody pretending to matter?" Ava's gaze never left him. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply sat there, every movement deliberate, her presence commanding more authority in its stillness than Richard could muster in his fury. Her fingers tapped lightly on the table once, twice, and then she spoke. "My name is Ava Morgan." The name landed like a thunderclap. A few gasps echoed across the room. One guest choked on his wine. Another whispered to her husband, "Did she say Morgan? The Morgan?" Richard's smirk faltered. His jaw tightened. Elaine's eyes widened just slightly, recognition flickering behind her mask of disdain. Because they had heard the name before. Everyone in that room had, whether they admitted it or not. It was a name whispered in financial circles, written in headlines about corporate takeovers, attached to rumors of a mysterious CEO who never appeared in public. Ava Morgan, billionaire, innovator, power broker. And here she sat, dressed like an ordinary woman, humiliated as if she were no one. Elaine forced a laugh, brittle and too sharp. You expect us to believe that? This woman, sitting here in rags, is the Ava Morgan? Please, the real Ava Morgan wouldn't step foot in a place like this without security or cameras. But the unease in her eyes betrayed her words. Ava leaned forward, her calm voice carrying to every corner of the room. Do you really think power needs to be announced? Do you really think money needs a stage? Her words cut deep. Because the Carters thrived on spectacle, on showing, boasting, flaunting. Ava thrived on the opposite: silence, strategy, shadows. And now, the shadows had stepped into the light. The room erupted into whispers again. It's her. It has to be. She owns half the tech sector. Why would she be here? If it's really her, then the Carters just humiliated the wrong woman. Richard's face flushed red. He slammed his palm against the table, rattling the crystal glasses. Enough of this nonsense, he barked. You're nothing. Nobody here believes you. But even as he spoke, even as his voice thundered through the restaurant, his eyes betrayed him. There was fear there, small, flickering but undeniable. Naomi watched, clutching the envelope to her chest, realizing the full weight of the storm she had stepped into. This wasn't just a clash of arrogance and dignity. This was a war between titans, and somehow she had become the one holding the deciding piece. Ava sat back, her expression unreadable, her presence commanding. She had given them her name, but she had not yet given them her truth. That part was still to come. What would you have done if you were in that room, believed the Carters, or believed Ava? Subscribe now and drop your country in the comments. Let the world see where you stand when arrogance meets the quiet power of truth. The name still echoed through the room like a storm that refused to pass. Ava Morgan. Some whispered it with awe, others with disbelief, but no one could ignore it. And in that silence, the atmosphere of the restaurant shifted, not subtly, but like a floor giving way beneath everyone's feet. One guest, a man in his 50s with a silver watch and a nervous glance, leaned forward in his chair. If she really is Ava Morgan, he whispered loudly enough for others to hear, then the Carters, they may have picked the wrong fight. Across the room, a younger woman clutched her pearls. Nonsense! If she were truly Ava Morgan, she wouldn't be dressed like that. She wouldn't be here alone. The Carters are right. She's a fraud. The murmurs spread, splitting the room down invisible lines. Some saw Ava's calm authority and believed. Others clung desperately to the Carters' wealth and dominance, afraid to detach themselves from the power they had always admired. Elaine seized on the doubt like a viper striking prey. She stood, raising her voice so it cut through the whispers. Look at her. Do you see billions on her? Do you see power in those plain clothes? No, this woman is a fraud. And that waitress, she pointed at Naomi, her jeweled finger trembling with rage, is her accomplice. Together they staged this pathetic stunt to humiliate us. Her words rang out, and for a moment, the crowd wavered. Some nodded, others frowned. But then Ava finally spoke again, her voice low, controlled, and dangerous in its calm. Funny, she said softly, how quickly the guilty cry fraud when faced with their own signatures. Her eyes flicked to Naomi's hands, still clutching the envelope. All heads turned to Naomi. The paper seemed to glow under the scrutiny, more powerful than any jewel or suit in that room. Naomi's hands shook slightly, but she didn't let go. The manager stepped forward again, his forehead damp with sweat. Please, everyone, he stammered, let's not turn this into... But he was drowned out by the voices rising around him. She has proof. Let her show it. The Carters wouldn't do something illegal. This is absurd. If she really is Ava Morgan, then why would she be here at all? The room was no longer a dining hall. It was a courtroom, and the jury was divided. Richard slammed his hand down again, his booming voice rattling the chandeliers. I don't care who she claims to be. This is our city, our circle, our world, and she He jabbed a finger at Ava. Doesn't belong in it. The words hit the air hard, sharp, undeniable, and that was when Ava finally rose from her chair. Slowly, deliberately. Her every movement was calculated to command attention. When she stood at full height, her presence dwarfed even Richard's, not in size, but in weight. Her voice carried across the silence that followed. You say I don't belong here, but I built companies that make this city run. I employ thousands whose paychecks keep your skyscrapers lit. I fund technologies your children will depend on. I have given more to this country than you could ever dream of. And yet, she paused, her eyes sweeping across the room, lingering on Naomi. Tonight I am treated like nothing. The silence was heavy, suffocating, but Ava's words cut through it like a blade. Some in the crowd lowered their eyes in shame. Others clenched their jaws, unwilling to let go of their prejudice. The battle line wasn't just between Ava and the Carters anymore. It was in the hearts of everyone in that room. Ask yourself, if you were sitting in that restaurant, whose side would you have taken? The side of wealth and arrogance, or the side of truth and dignity? The restaurant was no longer a place of elegance and quiet dining. It was a battlefield. Every eye was locked on Naomi, her trembling hands clutching the envelope that seemed to hold the power to destroy billionaires. She could feel the weight of it pressing into her chest like a stone. Elaine's voice cut through the silence. "Show them then," she snapped, her tone desperate beneath the veneer of authority. "If it's so real, show them, or admit you're nothing but liars and frauds." Naomi's throat went dry. She hadn't asked for this. She wasn't a lawyer, a politician, a fighter. She was a waitress, working double shifts to keep the lights on. But somehow she had been thrust into the center of a storm that could topple empires. Ava's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. Without a word, they said everything. Trust yourself. Naomi swallowed hard. Her fingers shook as she pulled the folded paper halfway out of the envelope. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the sight of the official Carter Corporation seal stamped at the top. Richard's face drained of color. He stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Don't you dare!" But Naomi had already unfolded the first page. Her voice was shaky, but the words were clear enough to carry across the room. Wire transfer, $32 million, to an offshore account in the Caymans. The room erupted, chairs scraped, forks clattered, whispers rose into shocked exclamations. She read it, she really read it. That's a crime. If this is real, it's criminal. It has his signature, my God, it has his signature. Elaine bolted upright, her face twisting. "Stop her! She's lying! It's forged! She's nothing!" But it was too late. The words had already left Naomi's lips, and once spoken, they could not be unspoken. Richard lunged forward, his hand outstretched to snatch the paper from Naomi's hands. But Ava moved first. For the first time all night, Ava touched Naomi, not to take the paper, but to steady her. Her hand rested lightly on Naomi's shoulder, grounding her as the billionaire towered over them, and in that quiet moment, Ava whispered something only Naomi could hear. "This is exactly where I needed you to stand." The word stunned her. Needed? Had Ava planned this? Had she chosen this restaurant, this table, this night for a reason? Naomi's heart pounded. Questions raced through her mind, but the room gave her no time to answer them. Richard's face twisted with fury. His voice thundered across the restaurant, shaking the chandeliers. "If you repeat another word from that paper, I will destroy you." But Naomi didn't flinch. Because Ava's presence, Ava's calm, Ava's hand on her shoulder told her one thing. The truth was bigger than fear. The crowd leaned in, hungry for the next word. And Naomi knew whatever happened next would either save her or ruin her forever. If you were Naomi, holding that envelope with the whole world watching, would you risk reading the truth or hand it over to protect yourself? The dining room felt like it was vibrating, the energy pulled taut like a string ready to snap. Naomi stood frozen, the damning words still echoing in the air. Richard loomed inches away, his hand clenched, his face red with fury, and yet Ava remained perfectly calm. She rose slowly, her hand slipping from Naomi's shoulder. The billionaire who had sat in silence most of the night now commanded every gaze in the room. Her voice was steady, quiet, but lethal in its precision. "Enough, Richard. You've lost." The words sent a shiver through the air. But then, Ava did something no one expected. She reached into her bag and pulled out a second envelope. Naomi blinked. The crowd gasped. Richard and Elaine stiffened. 2 envelopes. Naomi's heart stuttered. Then what was the one she was holding? Ava placed the second envelope gently on the table. Unlike the first, this one bore an embossed seal, not of the Carters, but of a federal agency. The room went silent. Ava's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "You think this is about embarrassment?" she said softly. "You think I came here to humiliate you in front of your circle? No, Richard. Tonight was never about this room. Tonight was about leverage." She tapped the sealed envelope with one manicured finger. "The Department of Justice has been investigating your company for months. This," she gestured to Naomi's trembling hands to the first envelope, "is a copy. The originals, already in the hands of federal prosecutors. What you witnessed tonight wasn't an accident. It was the final confirmation they needed." Gasps, murmurs. A woman at the far table clutched her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Naomi felt the floor tilt beneath her. A copy? She'd been holding a copy? And Ava had orchestrated the entire scene, this dinner, the humiliation, even Naomi's intervention, because she needed it all witnessed. Her stomach twisted. She had stood up for Ava out of instinct, out of dignity. But Ava had chosen her. "You used me," Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. Ava turned to her, her expression unreadable. "I needed someone genuine. Someone who would act, not out of greed or calculation, but out of truth. And you did." Naomi's throat tightened. Used or chosen. She couldn't decide which cut deeper. Richard's fury turned to panic. He slammed both fists against the table, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this, Morgan. You'll regret the day you ever crossed us." But Ava didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice soft enough that the room leaned in to hear. "No, Richard. The only regret here is that you underestimated me." The second envelope sat untouched on the table, glowing like a death sentence. The Carters had clawed at Naomi, dismissed her, humiliated her. But Ava had orchestrated everything from the shadows, and now their empire trembled at the edge of collapse. The room was in chaos, and yet Naomi's mind whirled on a single question. Had Ava Morgan saved her or sacrificed her? If you discovered that the person you stood up for had been using you all along, would you feel betrayed or proud to have been part of something bigger? The restaurant was no longer whispers and tension. It was chaos. Guests leaned across tables, murmuring in disbelief. Some pulled out their phones under the white tablecloths, pretending to check messages while secretly typing furiously. Others stared openly, hungry to catch every detail, knowing this night would be retold for years to come. Richard Carter's face glistened with sweat. His tie hung crooked, his fists clenched at his sides. The swagger that had once made waiters cower and executives bend was gone. In its place stood a man cornered, desperate. "She's lying," he barked, his voice cracking as he gestured wildly at Ava. "This is slander. None of it's true. You're all being manipulated." But the crowd no longer looked convinced. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered sharply to her table, "Why would she need to lie? She's Ava Morgan. She doesn't need money or power from them." Another man muttered, "If the DOJ really has the originals, then Carter's finished. No amount of denial will save him." Elaine slammed her hand against the back of a chair, her voice shrill, desperate. "You're fools, all of you. Do you know who we are? Do you know what we control? This restaurant, this city, it all bends to us. Not to her, not to that waitress. Us! But her words rang hollow, even to her own ears. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty fraying. Some stood up and quietly left, unwilling to be tied to a sinking empire. Others stayed, but their eyes had changed, from admiration to fear, from envy to disgust. Naomi clutched the envelope tighter, her pulse racing. She had seen arrogance before, but never its collapse. It was like watching a mask shatter in real time, the Carters' power crumbling not with violence, but with exposure. The manager, sweating, trembling, finally spoke, his voice cracking. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, please. Maybe it's best you leave before this escalates further." Richard snapped his head toward him, fury blazing. "Leave? You dare tell us to leave?" But before he could lunge, Ava spoke again, her voice calm and cutting. "You're already gone, Richard. You just haven't accepted it yet." The words landed like a gavel. The crowd erupted again, this time not in whispers but in voices rising against the Carters. "She's right. You're finished. We won't stand with you after this. If the feds are already watching, I want no part of your circle." For the first time, the Carters weren't feared. They were abandoned. Elaine's face crumpled, her perfect mask cracking under the weight of humiliation. Richard's hands shook, not with anger this time, but with the dread of a man realizing his empire was slipping beyond his grasp. And in the middle of it all, Naomi stood frozen, still holding the envelope, still reeling from the truth. Because even in their collapse, one question burned hotter than ever in her mind. Was she Ava's ally, or Ava's pawn? When the powerful fall, will you stand with the truth, or scramble to protect yourself like those guests? The dining hall was no longer a sanctuary for the wealthy, it was a stage of ruin. Richard and Elaine Carter sat slumped, their power bleeding out like sand through their fingers. Their guests, once allies, once admirers, were now witnesses to their collapse. Some had already slipped away, unwilling to be associated with the fall. Others stayed, not out of loyalty, but out of hunger, for spectacle, for gossip, for blood. And Ava Morgan, she remained untouched. She adjusted her coat with slow, deliberate grace, as if the chaos swirling around her was nothing more than background noise. Her eyes never once flickered toward Richard or Elaine. She didn't need to. Their downfall was already complete. Naomi still stood clutching the envelope, her hands trembling, her heart caught in the storm of betrayal and awe. She wanted to ask, "Why me? Why here?" But the words wouldn't form. Ava turned to her at last, her voice soft, almost private, though the room hung on every syllable. "You did well tonight." Naomi swallowed hard. "Was I just part of your plan?" Ava's gaze lingered, calm but unreadable. "You were part of something bigger than yourself." It wasn't an answer, not fully, not enough, but it was all Ava gave her. She picked up the second envelope, the one with the federal seal, and tucked it neatly into her coat. Then, with a faint nod to Naomi, she began to walk toward the door. The crowd parted instinctively, like water splitting for a ship. Not a single person dared block her path. Even those who doubted her identity no longer had the courage to speak it aloud. Naomi's chest tightened as she watched her leave. She wanted to call out, to demand the truth, to understand why Ava had chosen her of all people. But her voice failed her. At the door, Ava paused. Without turning back, she spoke one final line that silenced the room. Tonight was not the end. It was only the beginning. And then she was gone. The heavy doors closed behind her, and with them, the certainty of the room collapsed. The guests erupted into frantic conversation, debating, speculating, fearing what tomorrow's headlines would bring. But Naomi stood frozen in place, the copy still in her hands, her mind spinning. Was she Ava's ally, or Ava's pawn? Was this justice, or just another move in a game she could never fully understand? The only certainty was this: her life would never be the same again. If Ava had walked out of your life like that, leaving you with questions, would you chase her for answers, or let the mystery consume you? The restaurant had become a different world the moment Ava Morgan disappeared through its doors. The laughter and chatter that had once filled the air were gone. In their place was a haunting silence, broken only by frantic whispers. The Carters sat in their ruin, Elaine with her mascara streaking down her face, Richard staring blankly at the untouched glass of wine before him. No one offered them comfort. No one dared. Naomi remained standing, the envelope still clutched in her hands. Her chest rose and fell as though she had just run a marathon. She could still feel Ava's presence, though she was long gone, the weight of her words, the chill of her calm, the mystery of her intentions. Her manager approached timidly, wringing his hands. "Naomi, maybe you should hand that over. This is too dangerous for you to hold." She looked down at the envelope. The paper that had transformed her from invisible to indispensable, the copy of the Carters' sins, the trigger of an empire's collapse. For a moment she considered it. She considered handing it over, returning to anonymity, burying the night in silence. But something inside her rebelled. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind once again. Dignity is defended, not given. Naomi clutched the envelope tighter, a new fire flickering in her chest. She had been a pawn tonight, maybe even a sacrifice. But what if she could turn this into her own beginning? She took a slow step forward, past the tables, past the murmurs, past the stairs. The crowd parted for her, just as it had parted for Ava. For the first time in her life, Naomi wasn't invisible. Every eye followed her. And in that moment, she asked herself a question that burned hotter than fear. Was she willing to remain a waitress in someone else's story? Or would she claim her place in her own? The answer wasn't clear, not yet, but the choice was hers, and the world was watching. Justice seemed served, but was it enough? Was Naomi a hero or just a piece in Ava's game? If you were Naomi, what would you do next? Hand the envelope over, or keep it? Comment your answer, subscribe now, and tell us your country, because history won't wait, and neither should you. The restaurant emptied slowly, like a theater after a play no one expected to witness. Some left whispering into their phones, already spreading their version of the night's events. Others lingered, unwilling to step away from history. But Naomi remained. She stood at the center of it all, still holding the envelope, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. Her heart was a battlefield, fear pounding against dignity, doubt clashing with courage. Her manager urged her again. "Naomi, please give it to me. This doesn't belong in your hands. It's dangerous." But Naomi shook her head slowly. "Maybe it doesn't belong in my hands, but it doesn't belong in theirs either." She nodded toward the Carters, still slumped in their seats like toppled statues. Elaine glared at her, venom dripping from her eyes. Richard barely moved, but his silence was heavier than any threat he had shouted earlier. Naomi stepped closer to their table. The envelope trembled in her hands, but her voice was steady. "All night you tried to convince me I was nothing, just a waitress, invisible, replaceable. But if I was truly nothing, then why are you so afraid of what I'm holding?" The room froze. Even the waitstaff paused in their clearing of dishes. Richard finally looked up, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Because it can destroy everything." And there it was, the admission, the crack in the mask. Naomi stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back. She knew she had a decision to make. She could hand the copy over to the authorities and walk away, or she could keep it, hold on to it, and decide for herself when and how to use it. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she slipped the envelope into her apron pocket. "Then maybe," she said softly, "it's time someone like me had something powerful for once." The Carters' faces twisted in rage and fear, but Naomi didn't flinch. She turned her back on them and walked away, her choice made, not out of Ava's shadow, but out of her own fire. Outside the restaurant, the city pulsed with its usual Friday night chaos. Cabs honked, neon lights flickered, and crowds bustled, unaware that inside, history had just shifted. Naomi stepped into the cool night air, the envelope pressed against her chest. She breathed deeply, as if tasting freedom for the first time. But with that breath came questions she could not silence. Where had Ava gone? Why had she chosen Naomi? And what would the envelope mean for her life tomorrow? A black car pulled up at the curb. For a moment, Naomi's heart stopped. Was it Ava coming back for her? The tinted window rolled down halfway, just enough for Naomi to see a driver in a dark suit. He didn't speak, but he nodded once, almost respectfully. Then he handed her a small card and drove away without another word. Naomi looked down at the card. No name, no number, just a symbol, an embossed letter M. Her chest tightened. Was it a summons, a warning, or an invitation? The city lights glimmered on the card as Naomi slipped it into her pocket beside the envelope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't invisible anymore. And so we ask you, was Ava Morgan a savior or a manipulator? Was Naomi lifted up or used? And what would you do if the choice was yours? Burn the envelope, hand it over, or keep it. Subscribe right now, comment your country, and let the world see where you stand. Because this story may be fiction, but the power struggles it reveals are all too real.